Hello and welcome. My name is Waleed Mehr. I'm a Microsoft technical trainer specializing in Azure infrastructure, security and compliance, security operations, AI and Copilot courses. I'm here to walk through the Microsoft SC-300 Identity and Access Administrator Associate course with you. Ready to master identity governance with Microsoft Entra? In this video, we'll unpack everything from entitlement management to access reviews, privilege roles, and monitoring aligned with SC-300 certification. Whether you're stepping into security or refining your admin skills, this is your chance to gain practical, impactful knowledge that helps you secure your environment with clarity and control. So let's get started. Every organization needs a way to manage user accounts from start to finish. Governance and identity lifecycle management is a process of creating, updating, removing user accounts as people join, move within, or leave a company. This includes steps like provisioning accounts, granting access, monitoring usage, and deprovisioning when someone leaves. Having a clear identity lifecycle process helps ensure user gets the right access quickly and lose it when they no longer need it. This reduces security risks and keeps systems organized, making it easier for IT teams to manage access and protect sensitive information. Now, we want to talk a little bit more about what is entitlement management. Microsoft Entra Entitlement Management is a feature designed to help organizations efficiently manage who has access to what resource, like groups, applications, and SharePoint sites, both for employees and for people outside the company. Imagine you running a busy office where people constantly join new projects, need access to different tools, or even collaborate with other partners from other organizations. Keeping track of who should have access to which resource can quickly become overwhelming. Entitlement management steps in to automate and streamline this process by handling requests like access requests, approvals, assignments, and even setting expiration dates for access, so nothing slips through the cracks. This system is especially useful in a large organization or those that work closely with external partners. For example, employees might not always know what access they need or who to ask for it, and external users might be hard to track or manage. With entitlement management, you can set up clear workflows so users can request access, have it approved by the right people, and automatically lose access when it's no longer needed. This not only saves time and reduces administrative headaches, but it also helps keep your organization secure by ensuring that only the right people have access to sensitive resources at any given time. Right, before we go into having a look at entitlement management in our Entra portal, let's talk about some of the basic terminologies that we will be using throughout the demo. Before I go ahead, just bear in mind you would need a P2 license as a minimum to have a look at identity governance in your Entra environment. For certain features, you might also need Entra Suite license. Now, to start with, we are going to talk about a few terminologies during this demonstration, which would start off with us creating a catalog. Now, a catalog is nothing more than a container which will allow us to host different packages inside of it. Now, you might be thinking, what are these packages? Now, packages would simply help me create a different set of resources in one fixed place. So we will look into bringing in resources and setting up some policies for these resources so people can access them. So typically in your environment, you'll have a catalog and multiple packages within it. Each package will come with its own policy, maybe for external users, for internal users, different set of groups that you might want to have different policies for. They will all be assigned onto your access package. So the access package has resources. Now these resources will have groups like M365 or security groups. You can also bring in your applications and SharePoint online sites as part of that. Now, roles will also be available. These are still in preview, but should be available for you to start adding to this. For this, you'll require the Entra Suite license. Once you have your resources all in one place in the catalog, you can start creating multiple packages on different set of resources from the list that we have. and then assigning policies on who can access them and how should they be able to request this access. And again, you can have multiple policies on the same package, but we'll have a look at some of this on the portal just in a few moments. Now let's jump onto the portal to start creating our first entitlement management catalog. All right, we're back onto entra.microsoft.com, which is our Entra Admin Center. And we are going to start scrolling through the blade on the side. And this time we are working with identity governance. Now, as part of the requirement for you to be able to work within identity governance, you need to ensure first that you have the right license for you to be able to work within identity governance. So P2 would be a bare minimum. And for certain features within this, you might also require the identity governance license or the Entra Suite license to be added on. Apart from that, for you to be able to create and manage things that we are going to look at, you would also need an administrative role to be added to yourself, which in this case will be Identity Governance Administrator role that you would need to be able to perform some of the actions that we are going to look at. Now let's begin with entitlement management, and let's hide the Entra blade so we can see more details around the entitlement management. Now, one of the first things that we are going to start with is creating a new catalog today and work through the whole environment to create a new catalog. Now, depending on what you want to create the catalogs for, it could be for an entire project, it could be for an entire team, it could be for a particular group of users. You decide what you want your environment to look like for different catalogs. Now, I could start off a catalog for a team or a department in my organization, and within that have different access packages for different resources. Now, just for today's demo, let's create a new catalog, and we'll create this for our security team. So let's give this a name called SecOps, and we'll create this with a description saying this is for the security operations team, and we'll create it from there. Now, we are going to leave this enabled. Obviously, we're going to work with it. We don't want to turn it off. And do we want to enable this for external users? Now, I'll keep this on. By all means, this doesn't need to be on all the time. I'm simply leaving it on so I can show you certain options that will become available for us when we start working within this catalog. Let's hit create, and this is as simple as us creating a new catalog. Currently, this catalog has nothing in it, is pretty much empty, but is enabled and ready for us to work with. So let's jump into this catalog and start looking at some details. Now, as I land into this catalog, I have nothing in here at the moment, apart from some details of who's created it, and it's ready to go. So for now, we will start with adding some resources to this catalog. Now, you can bring in all the resources that might be associated to this particular catalog that you might want to break down into smaller areas, which we'll call access packages in a minute, and we'll start working with them. So let's start some resources or bring some resources in here. First of all, what kind of resources can we bring in? Again, just to remind you, you're able to bring in different groups, M365 groups, you can bring in security groups, you can bring in applications, you can bring in SharePoint online sites, and you can also add Entra roles. But like I said, you would need an Entra Suite license for that to add. Now, just before we go further, let's try and start bringing in some groups into this session. From here, we're going to look into adding a couple of groups. Let's just pick a few from the list. Let me scroll down, and I have a SOC group. I have a security group. We can add them both in here for just this part of the demo. Now, these two groups are ready to be added. That's good to see. Then let's bring in some applications right at this point. I'm going to bring in the application that we were working on in this course earlier, and I'll select one application for now. We can add more, but just for this demo, we'll leave as one. We'll bring in some more in a minute. For the SharePoint sites, let's have a look, see if I have any SharePoint sites available for me to add. I have a Contoso, I have a DevOps site, HR, and not necessarily a security site available. We'll bring in one of them. Let's bring in the Requestor site, and we'll bring that as part of the security as well. All right, now I've got a few resources added. By all means, if you were looking to bring in all the resources related to this particular team, by all means, bring them in one go if you like, if you know where they are and how they are. Ideally, it would be nice to map them all out and place them in one place under your resources in the catalog. Now, I've got some of these resources available. Now, the next part that we want to do is start creating access packages. So if a user needs access to some of these resources as part of my SecOps team, all they need to do is request for the access package. Now, let's go into creating an access package. And this is where we'll click on create new access package. I don't have one under this catalog. And we can come up with a name that we can create for this particular set of resources. Let's suggest that our security, let's give it security analyst, needs to have an access package just for security analysts. Right. By all means, when you have a description for what you're creating, obviously provide some more details so people know what access package should be available for who. And if I'm trying to request access to this access package, I should know if I should request for this. Is it for me? Should it work for me? And again, by all means, if there are multiple different names on different security access packages, it should be easier for someone to look at it and say, oh, this is for what purposes. So again, makes it easier for you to create multiple access packages. All right, that's a name that I'm coming up with and the description for my access package for today. Now, in my resource roles, I can see that I can add some resources in here. Currently, this particular access package has nothing in there. So what I can do is I can start looking at adding teams and groups in here. Now, it's showing me currently everything that's available for me in my resource list under this catalog. So I can go ahead and say, you know what, I'll add a bit of both or a bit of both of them as part of that setup. And I can say select. Now, what if I wanted to introduce at this stage another group that was not already there? Can I do that? Yes, by all means, you can. So you can tick that box over here to say, see all the groups and teams, and you should be able to see all the groups and teams that you have in your Entra directory, and then you can bring that to the list. Now, if I did that, that will simply add that to my resource list and also add that into this access package as well automatically. So do I need to create my resource list first and then add them here? Can I not just do them directly? I can, but a better way of working would be to have all the resources mapped out first in here and then create access packages from there. Might just make it easier for you to create a whole workflow and manage resources that are under the catalog. Now, I can do the same for the applications as well. I'll come back to the roles and details just in a minute. Let's just add some of the detail, some of the resources that we need. We can bring this application. However, let's bring in another application just to show you the detail I mentioned. So for this, I'm going to bring in another application called Cold Coffee, and we'll bring these two applications to my set. Now, Cold Coffee wasn't part of my resource set, but I can still bring it in the catalog, in the access package, and it will automatically be visible now for me in my resources, which we'll have a look a bit later on. We also have a SharePoint site. By all means, you can have more than one, but for just this demo, we'll leave it as one and we'll add this in here. Now, the interesting part over here is you are going to allow someone who's going to request access to all these resources as one access package. You will also need to define on what level of access they get. For instance, for my security groups that we have, or my groups that we have in our environment, do they become an owner for that group, or do they become a member of that group? So you can choose. We can add this particular group as a member. So let's make them a member of the group. Also, if I look at my applications, we created different roles in our applications. So again, in this case, I have an application called Cold Coffee. We have analyst and a writer for this. We'll give them an analyst role for that. our Ask console, so HR, we have end user and analyst. We can give them end user. Again, these are the roles that we defined within the applications when we were managing applications and creating them in our Entra environment. If you haven't seen that in one of the previous videos, I recommend you have a look at that. All right, finally, for my SharePoint Online sites, again, these are different roles that we could typically assign people when they're looking at SharePoint Online sites. Do they become a visitor? Do they become the owner or the member? For now, we'll give them all a member access to the resources. And that's what I'm assigning. Whoever gains access to this access package, that's what you get. And these are the permissions that you will get to be able to work within them. Now, pretty much, this is where most of my details around the access package stop. However, as a part of my access package, I also need to define a policy. And while I create the access package, it will help me in creating my very first initial policy for this access package as part of the menu. So the next parts that we are about to complete, these all become part of my initial policy that will assign itself to this access package. So let's have a look at this. Who can access this or request access to this package? Well, we can choose. For now, if we don't want anyone to do this, we can leave it for the administrator to assign it. But if you're looking for that automation process for people managing this themselves, then that defeats the purpose. There could be certain access packages that you don't want people to request and only be added to by the admin themselves, and you might have a need for that too. For now, we'll move away from that. I am going to leave this for users in my directory, in your directory, for example, in my Entra tenant. They can access requests to this. So I'm going to leave it open for all of them. Now, within that detail, I can also define, is it any specific groups or users that I need to assign this access to? If that's the case, then I can go and simply define what that group looks like and who those users are, and I should be able to access that. I could, however, select all members excluding guests or all members including guests, depending on who this package is for. So you choose. You can have a bit of both. Or I can make this initial policy for just members excluding the guests and then go back and create a second policy for just the external guests, external and guests, to make sure we set different rules or settings for them. So you have all those options available for you to play around with. For now, I'll leave it as all users. Now, further down, I'm defining on, does this require approval? Can anyone request and then simply gain access to it? Or do we want them to be approved? Is there a need for them to see this? Are they the right person or coming from the right team, gaining access to the right resource? In that case, we can start having a look at some of that while we're defining this policy. So require approval, we'll leave it as yes. Require requester to justify this. So if I am requesting access to this access package, do I need to tell them why do I need access to this? Now, again, you can switch on and off some of these features. You don't need to have them all on. I'll leave this on to say, hey, requester, please justify why you're looking to gain access to this package. So as an approver, I can see this person is requesting access, but also I understand why. So I can leave that on. Now, in terms of how many stages do I want someone to approve this? You can define that depending on your organization and how your workflow looks like in your organization. For instance, if a user requests something, if I have certain procedures in my organization that a manager needs to approve that first, I need to send it to the security team and they need to approve it after that, and then I need to send it to the IT team to go and implement this. I might have a whole workflow like that. In that case, I could simply set this as down to say, hey, let's put down to 3 approver. First approver is my manager. Second approver, once the manager approves, only then it will jump to the second approver. So second approver would be my security team to approve that, hey, the manager is okay with this. Should we allow them access to all these resources? Is it okay under my security policies? If they approve it, it goes to IT. Now, when it comes to IT, they know managers approved it, the security's approved it, they're good to go with doing this work, and if they approve that this is all okay, they can implement, they can approve and let the user have access to that. So you could have a whole workflow design just based on number of stages. But for this demo, we'll just leave it one stage for today, and we can add this. Now, again, if you've seen one of my earlier videos in the series, we speak about how you can create a user profile. And with the user profile, you can add a lot of different user details. One of those details will be your user managers, adding managers to different people in your environment. Now, if you haven't completed those details under user profiles, clearly it wouldn't help you in some of the features like the conditional access, like dynamic users, and including looking at your identity governance. In this case, I can simply say, hey, request would go to your manager. Now, whoever your manager is, any individual that's requesting for this, it will go to their manager based on what is in their profile. Now, I could do that. Just for this demo, we're moving this away to a specific user. I am going to assign myself to be an approver so we can see this as part of a whole cycle when we make one of our users request this, so I can go into approving that. So let's go adding myself as an approver. All right, some more details that follow through. There are decisions must be made in how many days, how quickly do you want this decision to be made? Once somebody has requested access, do you want to take as long as 14 days to define this? Now, again, you could choose anything between 1 to 14 days. It could be that based on your workflow, you might need this happening within 2 days or 3 days or less. You decide what works for you best. I will put down 5 for now, not 500, and I'll leave it as 5. I need within 5 days someone to take a decision. Now, require the approver's justification. So whoever is going to approve this, I also want them to justify on why they're approving this. By all means, you can turn them off. You can keep this on. It's a choice that you have. And under the advanced request options over here, we have another option here to see. If no action was taken, so let's say we decided 5 days, but no action was taken in those 5 days, should we have an alternative approver added onto this? And by all means, you can say yes to this and go ahead and add an alternative approver. It could be that that person is on holiday, they're on a leave of some sort, and they won't be able to respond back to this in 5 days. It's good to have an alternative approver added onto this. For this demo, we'll leave this off and we'll move along. Now, we have an option over here to disable assignments for emails. For the email notifications, we now have an option where you can disable assignments emails. So all sorts of different emails that you would normally get as part of the management of your access packages for the delivery, expiry, you're not going to receive any of those emails. Now, maybe they're important for some people and they want to keep a track of that. For that, please don't turn this feature on. If you don't want to receive these emails anymore, you can turn this feature on. So again, to avoid too many emails coming through inbox, and if you're managing them else, how, by all means, leave this or turn it on. Otherwise, leave it turned off. Apart from that, do I want to enable this particular access package? Do I want to keep this open for people to request? Well, for today's demo, we are keeping it on. It could be a possibility that after a package has been on for a while, you might need to go back into it and take the request, any new request off. Maybe you're creating a new package with an updated version of things and you want to shift people slowly to the newer version, and you want to stop people from requesting access to the previous package. So you could do that. You can take this off if you need. Now, further down, if you look at other details, we have allow managers to request on behalf of an employee, still in preview, but a very nice feature to look at. I have a new employee starting on Monday. I am simply going to request access for them. Their accounts gets created, their access package is already assigned to them, and they're good to go. As soon as they'll start working, they'll have access to everything. Now, I could do that. I can simply come in here and say, hey, yes, allow the managers to request packages on behalf of the user. And in here, it could bypass the first stage of approval where a manager would have approved it anyway. So you could do some of that. But just for today, we'll leave that off and we'll move along from here. All right. Now, let's have a look at the next tab that we have. This is the requester's information. So if I want any additional details from the requester to add in, I have the option over here to go into adding these details. Maybe asking a question in here. Now, the fact that under the policy, under the request, we've already added justification from the requester already, it will be a little pointless if I ask them again to say, hey, why do you need access to this again? So we could add other details. Maybe I can come in here and say, I don't know, provide your badge number, badge ID, for instance. So they must provide their badge ID. So I can verify it's them, the users, or maybe you have some other details that they need them to provide. Maybe a user number or something like that you might need them to add along with the justification. So I know it's them requesting for this access. Now your response can be short text, multiple choices, or long text. I'll leave it as short text for today and again move on. Now ideally, if this was a badge ID, I might actually go and create a regex, so I know exactly how the regular expression would look like, defining a few letters, few numbers, and if somebody tries to type in something different, it warns them saying that you've entered the wrong value there. So maybe a nice thing to look at, but I'll leave that out for today's demo, and I'll make it required. By all means, you can leave it as non-required, and they can choose to enter this detail or leave it blank. But I'm going to make it required. So we'll move on from here. Now, one of the last tabs that we have here is to look at the life cycle of this access package that we just created. So we obviously would like to have some sort of a life cycle added to this. Now, if you think this is going to be ongoing forever, it's still required that you go into looking at maybe some sort of a timeline that you can add to this, so you can go back and review what's in there. Is this still the most current resources in this access package? The policies are still correct. So you might have a good chance of reviewing or renewing some of that. However, if you think this is going to be an ongoing thing and you're never going to change this, you have an option to say never expire and keep on going forever. But again, like I said, recommended maybe a few number of days, maybe a year later, you want to review what's inside of this, and you can go back into checking if it needs any updates or you need to create a new one and replace this one, a choice that you can pick. Just for today's demo, I'll leave it for 365 days, and we'll leave it on for that long. Users can request a specific time access, and that's an interesting one. I'm going to leave that on. I'll demonstrate this a bit later on. This is where a user can suggest saying, hey, I only need access to this package for 2 days, and after that, I don't need access to it. So a user is being now clever because we're looking at just-in-time access. We don't want to give people access to something for more than what they should have. So if I create an access package for people only requesting for a month, then in that case, after a month, they should request for accessing this again. However, if you are clever enough to ensure that you are following the zero trust policies as an end user or requester, you can then say, I only need this for 5 days, not necessarily a whole month. So after 5 days, take this away from me so I don't have access. Just in case your account gets compromised, you no longer have access to those resources for a malicious actor to use your account, a compromised account, to harm some of those resources. Now we'll leave this on. We'll see how this looks like. Under the advanced expiry settings options, we have some other details like, hey, can the user request to extend this access if there was a need for them, that, hey, I'm not finished yet, I need to have another few days to work on it. By all means, they can. We can switch it on and off. We can also say, if that was the case, when the request for extension, do we still need an approver on there? And again, we can add some of those details in there. Finally, just at the bottom of my screen, I have an option over here to create access reviews. Now, for access reviews, we'll have another session on that, talking about what access reviews are. But while we are in our entitlement management, looking at creating access packages, let's have a quick look at what access reviews could help us with in entitlement management. Now, if I say I require an access package to have require an access review for this package, I can then suggest when should this start, and I can start adding a date. So the review for this package should start on a particular date. I can then define how frequently should this review this for me. Maybe quarterly, maybe monthly, maybe at the end of every month. I want this to come back and suggest, hey, you have these users that are accessing this package, and in the last 14 days, what are their activities like? Now, if they're not doing anything with this access package and they just have access to it, maybe it's time for me to remove them manually, so I don't have people just requesting for this package if they're not working with it. So this gives me a better view of who has access to these packages. And if they're stale and they're not working with them, there's no point in them holding on to them. It's better they release them as and when they need access to it, they request for it, just in time and just enough access. Again, bringing in the zero trust mentality when you're implementing some of these. Now, would we want a reviewer for this? Yes, we can add a reviewer. We can say every individual can review it themselves, and they can see a report suggesting, hey, you still have access to these. Do you need them, or release them? Or you can assign a specific person, or you can even assign like their own manager. So every manager will get a report on their employees to see what packages they have access to, and you can define that in here. Now we can define a fallback reviewer in here. So again, this is asking me to add a fallback reviewer. So all I'm going to do is add myself for that, and select OK, and that's what we are going to do. Now, apart from adding that, there are some responses that we can add to this as well. This is where we can automate the review process of what should happen if the review was completed. The system has generated a report to suggest what's going on. I can suggest if the system should come here and suggest if the reviewer does not respond, then do no change, or remove people from their access, or take the recommendations. Now, this is where the system can also decide for me and give me some decisions and saying, hey, I think you should remove these or keep their access. So based on that recommendation, based on the usage, I can define or suggest what it should do. Now, for that reason, I can also ask it to have the decision helper enabled, so I can see reasoning for how should I decide if they should or should not have access. And again, you could require the reviewer's justification when they take some of these actions, so they can say removing this user's access because they weren't active for a while, and we can carry on adding some of those details. Finally, we have reminders. If I am not reviewing the access review that's come back, maybe it can send me a reminder saying, hey, you've got pending review. Can you please go and take an action? And if I don't, then it will go and make those changes as we saw there, depending on the option we choose. We can say, take the recommendations, and we can apply that from there. All right, now that's pretty much it in terms of creating a new access package and the very first initial policy. Like I said, as part of that, we can have a quick review of everything that we've created within this, and we are going to hit create. And this is how you can create an access package in your environment. Now, this shouldn't take too long. This should be ready for me to go pretty instantly. Now, I do have a link for my access package, which I can give out to people to say, hey, this is a link and you can go and request this. However, that kind of defeats the purpose. A new person joining in your organization needs to access some of these resources, and they are now waiting for who should I ask to get this link before they can start gaining access to the package. So we don't want that. But if there was a need for it, the link is there. So you might have a question now. How should they do it then if I'm not giving the link out? Well, we'll come back to that just in a second. Before I do, just to remind you, if we look at some of the details over here, we have a couple of groups added, 2 apps added, a SharePoint site added, the policies enabled, is ready to go. And if I quickly have a look at this, if I go into the policies over here, we should have the initial policy created automatically as a part of creating the access package that we were working on. We already have that ready to go. Now, along with that, if I check the assignments at the moment, there's nothing assigned. No one's been assigned to this package. And if I check the request, there should be none waiting for us to work with. So how does this look like? Now, for this part of the session, we are going to jump onto our friendly end user that we've created in this series called Frank. Now, Frank earlier on in one of the previous sessions was looking at applications. What we're going to do in this case, we're going to go into checking myaccess.microsoft.com for Frank, and we can see that under that link, Frank should be able to find access packages. Now you can all do this, either going to myapps.microsoft.com to see your apps, or you can simply change the link to myaccess.microsoft.com. Now let's jump onto that and see if it will change it to that. Now let me sign in quickly. If it doesn't, okay, cool, that's all done. And let's get rid of that. Now just over here, if I highlight that for you, this is where you can see, in fact, let's zoom in first so you can see that clearly. And if I was to type this in, this is myaccess.microsoft.com. Now, anyone can try this in the organization. It should bring you to the access portals that you have in your environment. And under there, you should be able to see all access packages that are available for you to request. This particular access package, we've enabled it for anyone to see. So for me as Frank logged into this environment right now, I can see there's a security analyst package that we created just for security analysts. And it's got some resources in here, which I can go and click and see what they are and what they look like. So I can go and type in or click into resources to find out exactly what details I get some of the information around the groups. I get my SharePoint site access. So I'll get all access to these 5 things that we added to the package. Brilliant. Now, Frank wants to get access to this. So as part of the policy we create, we are requesting the requester to add their badge ID. So we'll give Frank Adams badge ID and say, this is it. And then we could request for a specific period. Like we said, we can go in here, define number of days we want from start date to end date. And you can choose 2 days, 1 day, as long as you need access for. And after that, your access to this expires automatically. It's a choice you have. Now, I am going to leave that off. Business justification, I am working on this project. Again, this is me giving a reason to the approver to say, hey, let me in. And we'll submit the request. And this is how an end user would typically see an access package and request for the access package. Now, how does this pop up in your approvers page? Well, let's have a look at my admin's email. And if you can see in the email, there's a request already from Frank coming to the approver to approve or deny the request for accessing the package. So all we can do right now is click on the approve request area to approve the request for it. Or if the approver wants to go onto myaccess.microsoft.com anyway, typically that would be sitting there in there for them as part of the approvals. Now, if I am doing my day-to-day job, typically I'm not going to be sitting on this page looking or waiting for people to send me a request to approve. I pretty much will rely on an email popping up in my environment to say, hey, there's a request, should I approve or deny it? So again, depends on the job role and the need for people to work with that. You could be refreshing this page to make sure you haven't got anyone waiting for an access review or access approval. Now, Frank's requests come here. We can go back in here to say, let's review this. What is this? We can see this is from a access or security analyst. Frank's requested this. And we have the requested for Frank. So Frank is requesting for themselves. Again, where we have this new option where a manager can request on behalf of someone. You would see that information there. Requesting details, we can see all the information here. This is the access to resource and some details over here. Let's go back in here to see package details on what they get access to. We can say this information again just to verify. Yes, Frank is asking access to all of those details. Is that correct? And if there was a history of Frank requesting this before, how many times Frank's accessed this before, approved, denied, whatever, I can see some of those details. And then finally, I can come to the decision saying, okay, I think we'll give Frank access to this package and we are going to go and approve this. Now, just before I hit approve, a few things to have a quick look at. Now, if I jump back onto my Contoso for a minute, my Entra environment, and go into the groups. As part of this group access, what we're giving Frank is access to 2 groups. For now, if I scroll down to the list of my groups, one of the groups is called SOC. And if I look at the members of that group at the moment, I have none. And if I take a step back out again, the second group Frank gets access to is the security group. And if we check the members of this group, I don't see Frank member of that group at the moment. Now, similarly, the application that we are registering in this part of the session as part of the access package, we're giving Frank access to our Ask Contoso HR application. And if I go into that and check just to make sure that currently looking at the roles, apologies, I should be going into enterprise application and looking at the Ask HR app. You might want to just look at Ask Contoso HR, and that's the app that we created. So if I go into that and look at the users and groups, this is where I can see assigned users to this. Now, we earlier on assigned Frank to this application. Just for now, I am going to try to remove Frank for it. Or in fact, we can leave that alone. We do have another application in our package, which was called the cold coffee. We can, this part of the session, maybe we can do that with cold coffee. And if we go into looking for my app called cold coffee right there, and just checking that Frank isn't a user assigned to this application. Sure, Frank isn't. So that's good stuff. Let's go back and approve all of that. And we are going to say approve, decision, reasoning for the approver to say that. Verified this user, and they're good to go. Right. Cool. Just like that. Add and submit. Right. Now, I've added or approved their submission for accessing this. Now, as a result, if I go back into Frank's account, I should be able to see that Frank is now able to go into all of these. Now, let's go back into all of these resources that we just checked. First of all, let's check this application where we were. This is still not, hasn't added yet, or Frank to this yet. Let's start with the, oh, cool. Now it's there. So we can see Cold Coffee now has Frank as a user. All right. Now, earlier on, we added Frank to my Ask HR application, but I added, not in there, in enterprise applications. And if I go into looking at my Ask Contoso HR, and Frank was initially added when we were doing a previous demo to this as a user. So this is where now, if we can check that again, Frank is still there. And if I go back into my groups one more time and verify the 2 groups that we saw earlier that Frank wasn't on, simply because we've now accepted or Frank's been given access to the package. Now, if we check the members on this, we have Frank there for SOC. So we should see the same process for our security team, security group. Frank should be a member of that too. Again, the same process would be repeated for my SharePoint site. So if I did go into that SharePoint site and looked at the members, Frank would be a member on that. So hopefully this gives you an idea that by simply creating an access package, you're now giving people access to the resources based on the roles you defined for them. Now, just before we stop talking about the entitlement management, one last thing to look at inside of my access packages over here would be this. There is a nice option over here to look at separation of duties. Now, what can I do with this and what does it let me do? What if you want to make sure that you don't have 2 different access packages assigned to the same user at any one time for whatever reason? you can come in here and define incompatible access packages for people. So if I already have access to this security analyst package, I might not be able to go and request for another security package. Till I release myself from this package, then I can request the other one. So you can do that. I could add incompatible groups as well, and we have another option there to look at too. So if I am already a member of a group, if by requesting this access package I get a membership of another group, maybe it will stop me from doing that, saying, hey, you can't be a member of those two groups at the same time. So if you need to do this, you can add those details in the separation of duties, which makes your life much easier, just to have that control so people don't have too much access in your environment. Now, let's come back out of my access packages one more time and have a look at this. So far, we've gone into creating resources. Just to quickly flash, we added the cold coffee later through the access package, so we can see that in the resources as well. We have the access packages ready, and this is where we will stop with the with entitlement management and creating some details. Now, a little bit more to this would be, how do I manage people that are external to my organization to gain access to these access packages? Apart from inviting those users into my Entra, and apart from creating the external multi-tenant solutions, is there another way of doing this? Well, there is. If I go into the tab right here that says Connected Organizations, now, within the connected organizations area, I can simply start adding a connected organization to work with. Now, what are these connected organizations? I am able to add different organizations in here that I collaborate with. Now, let's quickly start doing this, and I'll explain different options that are available for us to look at. Let's call this as my partner org. Again, by all means, come up with a name. I don't know, these are my, vendor for some resource, and I will put that in there. Now, what am I able to add in here? Well, typically when you go into the directory and domain option over here, you have a few options to look at. You can start adding organizations that typically collaborate with you into this environment so they can request access packages in your environment. Now, who can be added over here? Typically, you can add anyone that has a Microsoft Entra directory. You can bring them as part of the setup over here simply by typing in the directory name. As an example, if I go and say, I want to add Contoso.com. Now, because Contoso.com already exists as an Entra tenant somewhere, it's a straightforward process for me to add that, even though I don't necessarily have a connection to Contoso.com right now. But if I want people from Contoso.com to start requesting access to these packages, this is one way of me doing that. I can start doing some of that in here. Now, apart from that, if I wanted to start bringing in, let's assume, another organization that is not on Contoso.com, and it's not necessarily an Entra-based resource. Let's assume we have something called graphicdesign.com. Now, it does suggest the authentication type is no longer Entra. So again, this is not maybe something that's registered with Entra, that we can use this to have these users that live behind graphicdesign.com to go and use one-time passcode or a Microsoft account to log in. So we can do that. So we can suggest that we can add that to the setup. Again, these users coming from here should be able to log in. Now, there's one more scenario that we can use in this case. If, for instance, I added Contoso.com as part of this setup, with Contoso.com, if that domain in Entra has other verified domain names. For example, they have another custom domain name called fabricam.com under the same tenant, and they're multiple. In here, if I just add Contoso, Users working with fabricam.com on the same tenant should also be able to verify themselves, because I've already added contoso.com on my list of connected organizations. So this is a way that I can start bringing in organizations. Let's hit add and say select, and this is where I can start adding organizations from outside to come and collaborate with me on requesting these access packages. Now I can add other details to it, like internal sponsor, external sponsor, point of contact for me internally or externally to talk to people about different things. But for now, we'll leave them blank and we'll simply go and create that package. Now, obviously, it's asking me to add these sponsors there. I don't have them added. So we'll simply create this connection for now. Again, hopefully this gives you an idea that we have other ways of adding people to this environment. If they're not already part of your setup, we can use the connected organizations to make these packages available for external users as well. Now, one last thing to look at would be kind of control do I get for anyone that's external to my environment. And under the control configuration, you see the option saying what would happen to these external users if they're part of my setup and their access package has run out. Now, we can go into the settings to define these. Typically, if you look at these settings, it's suggesting that, hey, remove this external user. I don't want this user to be able to see anything in my environment anymore, so remove them. Also block the external user from signing into anything in my directory because they no longer have a valid access package, so remove them. Now, what would happen? They will stay in a deleted state for 30 days, and after 30 days, they get permanently deleted from your environment, just like you would normally do when you delete a user in your setup. They stay in a deleted state for 30 days and they get permanently removed after 30 days. Now, if within these 30 days, this user gets access to another access package and has got a validity available for it, they can carry on working with it and their profile comes back to life and they get access to all the resources that new access package allows them, and they can carry on working. And again, this is something that you can define and change if you want to under the connected organizations, under the control configurations of your resources. This concludes our session. We encourage you to review the reference modules, check your knowledge with the additional study materials, watch other videos in this course, or search out your next favorite topic on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.